Hello, everyone. In the wake of Kingdom Come Deliverance, there seems to have been like a furore in the writing community because in the gaming community you had all the gamers and people arguing over the ethnic diversity or lack thereof in Kingdom Come Deliverance. And then that seems to have gone up to the journalisty world, and then the journalists have gone mental about it, and now the writers are talking about it because they're obviously reading this or they know the journalists or whatever, and the writing coaches and writers are all like, "Oh, if you well, as with most liberal points of view, they say something that's relatively common sense, and you nod your head and you agree, and then they just keep going until you face palm and tell them to just get lost." So they basically said, "Huh." There's a massive problem with all these medieval fantasy novels that only have white people in them. There's no ethnic diversity in them at all. And I go, yeah, it's a good point, actually. And then they continue on, because obviously Europe was just so diverse, and you must just be ignorant and racist if you don't have ethnic minorities all peppered through your medieval fantasy novels. It's like, oh, for fuck's sake. So, because firstly, they keep referring to it as Europe, because we all know that Europe is one country, don't we? Like, and this isn't just Americans that do this, by the way, because liberals living in Europe and Britain do this too. But Jesus, talk about arguing from a position of ignorance. You're basically saying you're racist to a person and identifying them with a group that they don't actually belong to, because there's no such thing as a European. So let's clarify this. It is very, very boring when you read a book or watch a film and it's in a medieval setting and everybody is white. I mean, I find it quite bizarre. I've lived in quite a few places, and there was this one time I moved from a city to a small town. So the city really diverse, quite a large Chinese and there was a lot of black people lived there. There was a lot of Chinese people lived there, and there was a lot of Middle Eastern people lived there. So very cosmopolitan. And then you move out to this little town and it's only white people live there. It's really weird. Like, it's really fucking weird. You look around like, oh, this is odd. And then you move back to the city and it just hammers home how weird it was in the first place, and you've got to get used to everything again. And it's really quite funny. So I do like to see a wide cross section of people, and I don't mean just ethnically diverse. I mean, different economic incomes, different sexualities, different beliefs, different religions, all that sort of stuff, because it makes for an interesting story. That's what you want. It makes for interesting life. It's the sort of place you like to live, or I like to live. And but the thing is, Europe isn't just this one homogenous lump, and it isn't eternal. So when you say there were ethnic minorities in Europe and they need written into your story, it's like, well, do they now? Because it depends entirely on where and when. And so I'll tell you where they're right and I'll tell you where they're wrong. They're right if you're talking about particularly the Mediterranean and particularly Lisbon and Italy. Because what happened was the Mediterranean, you could get up into Europe through Greece, through Italy, or through Portugal, particularly Lisbon. Lisbon was the massive trading centre of Europe, and it was globalism before globalism. Massive global trading post. Really interesting stuff. And what was happening was they were bringing up a lot of African people to do work, or because they had goods to sell or whatever. And a lot of these people were free. This was something I didn't know until quite recently. And these people were, there was a lot of black slaves, but there was also a lot of white slaves. And this would have been around 1400 AD, and a lot of black and white slaves, but also, this is the bit that was interesting to me, lots of black free men, or women as well, presumably, and they were actually quite well to do, because you couldn't become an aristocrat. That was out of the question, because aristocrats were tied to the land. You couldn't get a black aristocrat any more than you could get a white Nigerian prince. It just wouldn't happen. However, you could get somebody who was as rich as an aristocrat who was black. That happened because they were coming up from Africa with goods nobody had even heard of before, and they were selling them all over Europe. These people were very well off, and some of them had slaves themselves, some of them white, and some of them didn't. It was just so lots of different types of people, because you had all the different ethnicities from all along the Mediterranean in Lisbon, plus all the Portuguese, plus British people, plus loads of sub-Saharan and North African people. Massive trading post. Then some of those people made it up through into what became the Netherlands, stayed in the Netherlands, and were taken over to Japan, some as slaves, but some as traders. This was a very rare occurrence, but it did happen. So what I'm saying is, if you were writing a medieval history in Japan and you had like a black guy in it, that wouldn't actually be historically inaccurate. That would be possible. But should you add that in? Should like 10% of the people in your Japanese historical fantasy novel be black? No, that's absurd. Should 10% of them even be white? No, that's absurd. We're talking really small numbers of people here, and it depends when as well. So I'm talking about 1400 AD. Now, you move... So these people are right. Massively diverse populations. And then this is where they start to fall to bits, because they are trying to make out that the whole of Europe was like that. And it just wasn't. I said they made it up as far as what became the Netherlands, in very small numbers. They didn't make it up as far as Germany. That really didn't happen. There's very little... you can see it a lot in art. Paintings, engravings. There are writings of the time, and there are censuses as well. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of art coming out of Portugal that showed that the black population was present, thriving, and free. So it's really easy if you just go and look at paintings from these countries. But I would urge you to do more than just that. Now, so they were just judging Europe as this one homogenous lump, and then calling the people they're lecturing racists. It's okay. It's one thing to educate people on how these things work, but you can't educate people from a position of ignorance. And this is the other thing, because people like to use Britain, because most historical fantasy seems to be set in Britain rather than places like Bavaria or something like that. Presumably just because Britain's got such a rich history of it, and America is an English-speaking country. So, when? Because see, if you were to set your historical fantasy in Anglo-Saxon Britain, I would put down money that there probably weren't over a dozen black people in the entire country during the Anglo-Saxon era, before the Romans. I would say that it's plausible. it's maybe there's more than a dozen, but almost none, right? Not enough to make even a tenth of 1%. Not enough. However, you get to Shakespeare time, so about 1500. Yeah, they were starting to come in, and they were accepted, and they were actually quite free. Mainly they came over as servants, but like a lot of white people were servants as well. A lot of them were free. I mean, you had the play Othello, where the lead character is a black guy. Like, that shows you how, not unremarkable, but how common it was to come across black people, particularly in places like London. Again, if there was a massive trading centre, it was probably very diverse. You come up to the north of Scotland in the same time period, you're not going to find any ethnic minorities of any kind, not even any Greeks or anything like that. It just didn't happen. But it did happen later, and this is what I mean: is you can't from an ideological position judge the whole of history and then say people are racist. Because if you tell me that during the time of William Wallace there should have been black people there, you're just factually wrong. And to call me names for that, no, you're being ideological. You're not wanting historical accuracy. And again, I referred to Kingdom Come in the beginning, and I'm going to try and round it off now. That's what I'm kind of getting at, is aside from the odd Mongolian who came down through Russia, there weren't any ethnic minorities in the Eastern Bloc. There were ethnic minorities all across the Mediterranean, all across Britain, at certain times. There was people in all the main trading centres of Europe, so mainly on the coasts, because everything was done by ship. Eastern Bloc, a lot of landlocked stuff, very northern, not very far along in the Renaissance, particularly in the north part of the Eastern Bloc. Medieval times, we weren't going to get any ethnic minorities there. And to say that somebody's setting a medieval story in Czechoslovakia in 1100 who doesn't have any black people in it is a racist is laughable, because no, that's factually correct. And even to this day, there's not a very diverse population in that part of the world. It's not racist to represent that lack of diversity. That's just fact. So, yeah, on balance, I'd say it would be refreshing. I think you would serve yourself well to put more minority characters in where they should be, and you should do your research. Go and look at paintings from the time of ordinary life. Go and do some reading. But don't, for a minute, let these ideologues bully you into having to put things in that aren't actually historically accurate because of their ideology. And certainly don't listen to anybody who tells you that, your European setting is one homogenous thing, because Europe was a massively divided continent. It was even more divided then than it is now, because places like Italy, France, and Germany weren't even united until the Renaissance. Italy wasn't even one country until Cesare Borgia conquered it and made it one country. You've seen all about the Venetian Republic and everything like that. That was a country, effectively. City-states, that's what they were called. They were states. So, yeah. Don't let these people bully you into doing stuff, but, for the sake of the readers and the sake of yourself and the sake of making the thing a bit more interesting to fucking look at or read, add some diversity in there. There've always been gay people, there've always been ethnic minorities dotted all over the place. Maybe make it a little bit like Shogun or The Last Samurai. Like, why not make a story about the one black guy in Bavaria who's a knight? Why not? That'd be fun. But like, don't make it like there's a Chinatown in the middle of medieval Glasgow, because there wasn't. Okay. So with that, thank you for listening. And yeah, hope that was of some interest to you guys, and maybe you'll go and do some reading or look at some art that might tickle your fancy as a result, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.